So again, what we're going to look at today is how the United States changed in the early years, and it's basically a review of stuff that you've already looked at for today's assignment. So, here we go. Early changes in the United States, early changes in the U.S. We're going to start by looking at something called manufacturing. Ooh, big word. We had it last semester. Who can tell me what it is? What does manufacturing mean? We dealt with it a lot when you looked at the economic section of the various countries in geography. What does manufacturing mean? Yes. Isn't it like making things? Yes, it is. Making things, yes. Manufacturing is making things. Review from geography. Now, if we look at the colonial period again being the 16 and 1700s, when the United States didn't exist, they were a set of what in the colonial period? The United States didn't exist, but we had 13 whats that made up what eventually became the United States. Colonies. That's why it's the colonial period. It's a time when we were colonies. How did they make things in the colonial period? How were things made in the colonial period? In the 16 and 1700s, how did things get made? Oh, come on. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Oh, now the hands are beginning to go up. Good. Because this is one of the main things from your assignment for today. It was, yes, they made them by hand. If you're going to need a cart, a wagon, to be pulled behind your horse, somebody made that by hand back then. All your clothing back then was made by hand. For the most part, you made your own clothing. You did not go to a store and buy it. You might go to a store and buy cloth, but then you had to make your own clothing. Do you think they had a lot of it? Did they have a whole closet full of different clothes to wear like you guys do? No. Guaranteed, nobody had the same thing. Everyone was unique. By hand is the way everything was done. And let's say you wanted a wagon. You'd go to somebody to make that wagon, and that one person would make all the parts for the wagon. They would make the wheels, they would make the seat, they would make the springs, they would make all of it. Back in the colonial period, while things were made by hand, one person made an entire piece. One whole item at a time. It wasn't like, okay, I'll make all the wheels, you make all the seats, Joey next door will make all the harnesses. No, you make it all. Believe it or not, that's the way the first cars were made, even after the colonial period. It used to be, when cars first were invented in the late 1800s, if you wanted a car, they made one car at a time, all together. From start to finish, they'd make a car, then they'd work on the next car. They didn't do it by parts. In the colonial period, everything was done by hand. All your clothes, the desks that you would be sitting in, everything was by hand. No machines back then. Then, something happens in Great Britain in the 1700s, and they begin to make things not by hand, but by what? In the 1700s, they begin to make things not by hand, but by machines, yes. Great Britain begins to use machines to make things. Why do everything by hand when you can develop machines to do it for you? Now, we're not talking about robots. We're not even talking about electrical machines or gas-driven machines. They're powered by something else. Now, this switch from making things by hand to making things with machines was called what? What was it called? The switch from making things by hand to making things using machines. It has a name. It was a drastic change. It was a drastic change, and that was called, correct, the Industrial Revolution. It was a revolution, just like there was a revolution in Russia, where they had a drastic change. In the Middle East, we talked about a revolution in Iran that was a drastic change. Here, the Industrial Revolution was a drastic change in how things were made. Now you set up factories to make things, or sometimes those factories are called mills. Like for making flour, you go to the flour mill. Or a textile mill made cloth. What powered these factories? What powered these mills? We're not talking electricity, we're not talking gasoline or diesel. What powered these mills? What allowed these machines to work? Rivers and streams, water power. And so most of these factories are going to be located by rivers or streams, flowing water. Flowing water. And your book had a picture to show you how that works. How water pushes on a wheel, called, believe it or not, a water wheel, to turn belts through a factory to make the machines operate. Here you see the water. The water flows. Goes down the wheel, it spins the wheel. That in turn spins this wheel, connected to various belts, which operate machines on 3 different levels of this factory. No electricity needed, no human power needed, no horsepower needed, only the power of water flowing. You normally needed to have somewhat of a fast stream to make this work. But as you see here, it's actually, here in this factory, it did all 3 things. The first floor was cleaning the cotton, the second was spinning it into yarn, and the third was weaving it using the power looms into cloth, which then people could buy, go home, and make their own clothes. How many of you would love to make your own clothes? You could be so individual. I don't know, Victor. I would be sort of interested to see the clothes that you would make. You'd make your own cool clothes? I could just see it now. A shirt with 3 armholes. Or a long sleeve shirt with 1 arm longer than the other. I can see it now. That's what would happen if I was doing it. Me and sewing machines, I don't even know how they work, really. So, needle and thread, I'd hurt myself too much. Because back then they didn't have sewing machines either. It was all by hand. All by hand. Until you get the Industrial Revolution. So, the Industrial Revolution started where? Raise your hand. Where did it start? Where did the Industrial Revolution start? Doug. It started in Great Britain. Now, the people in Great Britain tried to keep their factories a secret. But there was a guy that basically was like a spy, and he got the plans to a factory and brought them to the United States. And so then we get the Industrial Revolution in the U.S. Where does that start? Where does the Industrial Revolution begin in the United States? What region of the country? What region of the country might have some mountains and lots of streams for building these factories by? Yes. New England. Yes, in New England. For those of you that don't remember your elementary school geography, what part of the United States is New England in? How could you describe where New England is? Yes. It's in the eastern, okay? That's part of the picture. It's in the eastern part of the country. Can somebody be even more specific? It's in the eastern. It's in the northeastern. It's in the northeastern part of the United States. That is what or where you will find New England. Now, in New England, they don't have a lot of large farms. Why not? In New England at this time, you will find small farms, individual farms growing just for that family, sort of subsistence farming. Why aren't you going to get lots of large farms in New England? Yes. The soil was very poor. What physical feature makes up most of New England? What physical feature makes up most of New England? What physical feature makes up most of New England and is the reason why there are rivers and streams that you could build these factories on? Picture? What? There's lots of rocks, but can somebody name the physical feature that's there? Yes. The Appalachian Mountains are there. Since you have the Appalachian Mountains, you got a rocky, poor soil. And if you have mountains, artistic ability coming here, which direction does water flow? Does it flow downhill or uphill? Or across? Downhill. So if you got mountains, you're going to have rivers. If you have rivers, then you can have your factories. So because the soil is so poor and rocky, and it has rivers there, New England is a perfect location. The soil is too poor for large farming. Yes, people had farms. Yes, people have farms there today. Pennsylvania and Maine grow quite a few potatoes. Potatoes don't need good soil to grow in. When they grew stuff on the farms, it was primarily to feed themselves. And with mountains and that, you get more, starts with R's or S's, which I've already talked about, that you need to have these kinds of factories or mills. Rivers, yes. Look at this. Look at the mountainous regions here. This is New England. This is where you got the mountains, and from those mountains flow rivers and streams, which provide the power to the machines in the factories and the mills. Many textile mills, factories for making cloth, were located on these rivers and streams, and they had a new invention that wove the cloth together from the threads of cotton. What was that new invention? Give you a hint. PL. Mighty Morphin Blaine. Power loom, yeah. There were many textile mills, factories that made cloth with power looms located on the rivers. And they wove cloth from cotton. Take the cotton fibers, spin it with a spinning jenny, and then take that yarn and weave it into cloth. Any questions so far? You see how the physical geography of New England makes it the perfect spot for the Industrial Revolution in the U.S.? Poor soil because of the mountains, and the mountains have the streams to provide the power for those machines. So we have the power looms. We also get another invention as part of the Industrial Revolution, and it was invented by a guy called Eli Whitney. I know you might look at it and say, Ellie. It's not Ellie. It's Eli. He's not related to Whitney Houston. What invention did he make that drastically changed American society? It drastically changed American society. So much so that you can't stress it enough. The cotton gin. The cotton gin. And for those of you that don't know the word gin, it's a shortened form of what word in English? Can anybody figure it out? What word is gin a shortened version of? You think you know? No? Engine. Gin comes from the word engine. It was the cotton engine. It was the cotton gin. Gin was just a shortened word meaning engine or machine. Cotton gin basically removes the seeds from cotton. Has anybody ever seen a cotton plant? Cotton plants are nasty things. They're sharp, prickly. Your hands bleed by picking the cotton, and once you pick the cotton, you gotta get the seeds out. The closest thing I can compare it to is to something that you might know. How many of you have ever gone out in the summertime and picked open a pod from a milkweed plant? You open up the pod, and inside you got the silk and you got those seeds. Now imagine trying to remove all the seeds from that silk. Originally you had to do it by hand. Would that be an easy task? No. The cotton gin does it automatically, and it does it 50 times faster than doing it by hand. One person takes all day to do it. Multiply that by 50, and that's how many people you have to have working all day to do the same work as one person using the cotton gin during that day. Now you can produce, or you can clean up, cotton faster. Eli Whitney also invented something else. What happens at home if something breaks? Let's say your parents' car gets a flat tire. Runs over some spikes that somebody put in the road, destroys the tire. What do you do? Raise your hand. What do you do? Yes. Well, okay, change out the tire. What are you going to change it out with? What? Well, just in general, what are you going to change it out with? A tire. You're going to get a brand new tire. You're going to go down to the store and buy a new tire. Any of you ever have anything break and so you had to go get a part replaced in it? Raise your hand if that's ever happened to you. Now imagine that not being there. Something breaks, you have to go to somebody to make the part because every part is different because everything was handmade. That would be a pain, wouldn't it? That would be a pain. So Eli Whitney developed this concept of interchangeable parts. Yep. Oh, here's cotton, by the way. I forgot to show you the picture. This is cotton with the seeds in it that you have to pick out, all the little seeds. The cotton gin picks out the seeds automatically. Here's what the cotton plant looks like that you have to pick. But yes, Eli Whitney also came up with this idea of interchangeable parts. And that means that you make all the parts the same size. So if you are making a carriage, you make all the wheels the same size. You make all the bolts the same size. So that if one breaks, you just go to the shelf, put a new one on. Everything made from the same parts, which means it's easier to repair. And it's also easier to make. So now instead of somebody making the entire carriage, you have somebody over here specializing in making wheels. Somebody over here specializing in making springs. Somebody else specializing in making seats. Everybody makes a specific part that gets put together. And since all those parts are the same size, it doesn't matter if it's Joey's first or 50th spring that he makes. They should all be the same size and work in any of those carriages that are made. Make sense? Hopefully you have a better appreciation for the life you guys got now. Okay. Now, I want to go back to this cotton stuff a little bit. Because in the South, now did they have the Industrial Revolution in the South? No, not so much. It was mainly in the Northeast, in New England. But the Industrial Revolution does impact the South. It does impact the South. In the South, they didn't have lots of factories. They had lots of large farms. And those large farms focused on a single crop. This huge farm over here is only going to go tobacco. This farm over here is only going to grow rice. This farm over here is only going to grow indigo, which is used for making ink. What were those large farms that focused on a single crop called? A huge farm that focuses on a single crop is called a plantation. Yes. Now, before Eli Whitney came along, most clothes were not made of cotton. Most of your clothing was made out of wool from sheep. Bah. All wool clothing. Any of you have any wool clothing, like wool sweaters? Those are itchy, right? Imagine all your clothes made from that. Your socks, your shirts, your underwear. Itchy, itchy, itchy. Now, Eli Whitney invented that machine for taking the seeds out of cotton. What was that called again? On the count of 3, please. The machine's name? 1, 2, 3. Yes, he made the cotton gin. Well, if the cotton gin is how much faster than a single person? Raise your hand. If a cotton gin is 50 times faster than a single person doing the same job, we're going to need more what? Because now we have a lot more extra labor, so now we can grow more what? We can grow more cotton. Because the cotton gin works so well, now we can handle more cotton. Before, we couldn't plant too much cotton because it took forever to get those seeds out. Now, we have those seeds being taken out by the cotton gin. And so now the cotton gin allows us to plant more cotton. Well, if we plant more cotton, the cotton gin just takes the seeds out. We need to do something before the seeds can be taken out. And what's that? What has to happen to the cotton before we can even think about taking the seeds out? We need to pick it. No, not talking about your nose. We need to pick the cotton. Well, who's going to pick the cotton? It's a nasty job. Your fingers bleed by picking that prickly cotton. Is it something you want to do? So what do? You get slaves. And so now if we need more cotton, because of the cotton gin, we also need to get more slaves. Because of the cotton gin, the number of slaves in the United States increased drastically. The cotton gin allows you to clean cotton faster. So you make more, or you plant more cotton. Well, in order to plant more cotton, you need to have more people to pick it. So you get more slaves. Because of Eli Whitney's invention, slavery in the southern part of the United States jumps dramatically. Everybody see how that worked? How Eli Whitney's invention caused the increased need for slaves. Everybody see that? So if I were to ask you on a test, you'd be able to tell me what caused the increase in slaves, and you could say Eli Whitney's invention, the cotton gin, allowed cotton to be cleaned 50 times faster than before, so that required more cotton, and more cotton required more people to pick. One last thing that we're going to look at is transportation changes. Transportation changed as well. Congress, which is like Parliament, the thing that makes laws, Congress decided that it was going to build a road to the western part of our country, to the Wild West. In the early parts of the United States. Where is the border of the United States when we start out? Where is the western border? Remember the Treaty of Paris, 1783? The western border is the Mississippi. So when we talk about building a road to the west at this time is Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. That was the frontier. Ohio, the Wild West. Illinois, the Wild West. Not even thinking about Minnesota. Minnesota wasn't even on people's radars by then. But they build the national road that goes to those states. Why do you think they built the road? Why build the road to Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois? What does the road make easier? What will happen as a result of the road? Travel. It encourages people to move to these uninhabited areas. Spread the country out, spread the people out. Besides roads, what natural thing can you use for transportation? What's a natural thing you can use for transportation? We use it in Minnesota quite a bit, especially for our grain. Rivers, yes. Rivers are a great source of transportation. And they come up with a new invention to make river travel easier and faster, and that's the steamboat. Steamboats are invented. Now a machine will row the boat. It used to be you could sail downriver, but in order to go upriver, you actually had to have people haul the boat with a rope, walk it back upstream. Imagine something from Minneapolis taken all the way down to New Orleans. It'll float all the way down, but then you got to bring that ship back up. So you got to pull it up. They used to have people hired to do that job. They were called boatmen, and their job was to drag boats upriver. You get a steamboat, it's powered, and so it can go up and down the rivers by itself. You also get artificial waterways called canals. Canals are like fake rivers. They're man-made rivers. And they connect to other natural waterways. What is the famous one that we've talked about? The series of rivers, lakes, and canals that connect the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. What was that called? Okay. The St. Lawrence, almost, not waterway, seaway, there you go. St. Lawrence Seaway is made up of canals. In the United States, in the early part of the country, where were most of the canals located? Which part of the U.S.? Which part of the U.S. had most of those canals? Yes, in the north. Yep. Most of those canals were found in the north. So the north had the factories, the north had the canals, the north had the roads, the south had plantations. So ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of the early changes.